Today, we're putting Hannah Baker on trial. Is she bound for heaven or doomed to hell? I know this is a heavy topic. 13 Reasons Why was an emotional roller coaster, and Hannah's story left a huge impact. But today, we're looking at things differently. We're going to break down her actions, the good, the bad, and the complicated, and put them on our divine scale. Some of you might already have strong opinions on where she belongs. Maybe you think she was a victim of her circumstances, or maybe you believe she hurt others along the way. Either way, we're not just throwing out a verdict based on feelings. We've got a scoring system in place to make things fair. Here's how it works. Good deeds will add points to her heroism bar. Bad choices will raise the sinfulness bar. Redemption moments will influence the redemption score. And at the end, we'll see where Hannah stands. If her good outweighs the bad, she might earn her way to heaven. If the sins pile up, well, things might not look too bright for her. If she lands somewhere in between, purgatory might be the final stop. Okay, enough waiting. Let's kick things off with Hannah Baker's most heroic moments. Before we start listing things off, let's take a second to appreciate something. Hannah Baker wasn't a villain. No matter how complicated her story gets, she had moments where she showed kindness, courage, and even selflessness. So let's talk about the good she did. These are the small, everyday things that might not seem like a big deal, but they still matter. Welcoming new students. Moving to a new school is tough, and Hannah knew that feeling all too well. Instead of keeping to herself, she made an effort to be friendly, especially with newcomers like Alex and Jessica. She welcomed them into her friend group, making them feel included when they didn't know anyone else. She didn't have to do any of this, but she knew what loneliness felt like and tried to make sure others didn't go through it alone. 5 points. Encouraging Clay. Clay wasn't exactly the most confident guy. He was awkward, unsure of himself, and constantly second-guessing everything. But Hannah saw something in him and always made sure to lift him up. She flirted with him, teased him in a way that made him feel special, and even reassured him when he doubted himself. Whether it was at the movies, at work, or in their late-night conversations, she made him feel like he mattered. 5 points. Defending herself and others from bullies. Hannah wasn't the type to just sit back and take it when people treated her badly. She called out Alex's list when it started objectifying girls at school. She confronted Marcus when he tried to humiliate her. And she even spoke up against Bryce, though she was terrified. Even though standing up for herself sometimes made things worse, she refused to let people walk all over her. And when she saw others being mistreated, she didn't just ignore it, she spoke up, even when it cost her. Plus 5 points. These moments had a real impact, not just on one person, but on the bigger picture. Speaking out against the school counselor's bad advice, when Hannah finally went to Mr. Porter for help, she was met with indifference. Instead of actually listening, he brushed off her pain and made her feel like her trauma wasn't serious enough. Rather than just accepting it, she exposed how the school system fails victims, showing the world that even trusted adults can let people down. It was a bold move, and one that took real courage. Plus 50 points. Helping Clay understand the truth. Hannah could have left Clay completely out of it, but she wanted him to know the full story. Even though it was painful, she made sure he understood what happened, why she pushed him away, and that none of it was his fault. In a way, this gave him the push to fight for others, making sure no one else suffered in silence like she did. Now, this is where things get complicated. Hannah didn't just leave behind a suicide note, she left tapes, a choice that came with serious consequences. Some see them as a warning, others as revenge. But to me, it's clear she wasn't just giving up. She wanted people to understand what led her to make such a drastic choice. Leaving the tapes as a call for justice. You might agree with the tapes or you might hate them, but one thing's for sure, they forced people to confront the truth. Without them, Justin wouldn't have been held accountable for covering up a rape, and Alex might have never realized how much his actions contributed to someone else's downfall. The tapes exposed the hidden damage, making it clear that no one was truly innocent. Her death sparked change. This was an ultimate sacrifice in a tragic way. Her suicide forced people to confront the truth. Bryce was exposed as a rapist, Jessica realized what had happened to her, and Clay found the strength to fight for justice. The school could no longer ignore its failures, and the people who contributed to her pain were forced to face the consequences of their actions. Hannah earned a total of 315 heroism points, but where does that put her? She's done a lot of good, but is it enough to outweigh the bad? Before we decide, let's take a closer look at Hannah's flaws and mistakes, because no one is perfect, and she definitely made some choices that had serious consequences. Now, let's get into the tough part, Hannah's sins. Hannah's story isn't simple, and neither are the choices she made. I don't think she was entirely innocent, but she wasn't beyond saving either. She had moments of kindness, but she also made decisions that hurt people, and at times, her choices had serious consequences. This doesn't erase the pain she went through, but if we're being fair, we have to acknowledge everything. These are the smaller mistakes, things that might not seem like a big deal but still had an effect on others. Spreading rumors. High school is brutal, and while Hannah was a victim of gossip, she wasn't entirely innocent in spreading or allowing false stories to grow. She never corrected Justin's lie about their hookup and stayed silent as rumors about Tyler escalated. Whether intentional or not, her words and silence both played a role in fueling the rumor mill. Shutting out people who cared. It's understandable that she was struggling, but there were moments where she kept her parents at a distance, even when they tried to support her. They were dealing with financial stress and their own worries, yet they still cared about her well-being. Instead of opening up, she shut them out, making them believe everything was fine when, in reality, she was falling apart. Jumping to conclusions. There were times when Hannah assumed the worst about people without knowing the full story. This led to unnecessary fights and broken friendships that could have been avoided. One example of this was when she pushed Clay away at the party. She believed he would eventually hurt her like everyone else, so she jumped to conclusions before he even had the chance to prove otherwise. Plus 5 points. These choices had a real impact on others, causing emotional or mental harm. Exposing people's secrets. The tapes weren't just about telling Hannah's story. They also exposed personal truths others weren't ready to face. While some, like Bryce, deserved it, others, like Courtney, were forced into the spotlight. Hannah called Courtney out for spreading lies, but in doing so, she outed her sexuality without consent. Courtney was wrong for betraying Hannah, but exposing such a deeply personal secret only added to her fear and shame, making her just another victim of Hannah's revenge. 50 points. Publicly humiliating Zach. She lashed out at Zach after he tried to be kind to her. Instead of accepting his help, she embarrassed him in front of his friends, making him feel worthless. 50 points. Falsely accusing Tyler and letting him become a target. Tyler violated Hannah's privacy by spying on her, which was inexcusable. But instead of reporting him, she publicly exposed him, painting him as a predator. While he was guilty, her call-out made him a bigger target. From that moment, Tyler became the school's punching bag, bullied, beaten, and humiliated, especially by Monty and his group. The abuse escalated until he was sexually assaulted in the locker room, leaving him broken. Plus 50 points. These are the actions that had the biggest and most devastating effects on others. Forcing Tony to carry her pain. Tony was one of the only people who never hurt Hannah, yet she put a huge burden on him. She gave him the tapes and made him responsible for making sure everyone listened to them. This put him in a tough spot. He had to decide whether to follow her wishes or do what was right. It wasn't fair to him, and it made him feel guilty, like he could have helped her sooner. Instead of leaving him with answers, she left him with the weight of her pain. So 100 points. Manipulating Clay's emotions in her final message. Even Hannah admitted that Clay didn't belong there on the tapes.
Your name does not belong on this list. But you need to be here if I'm going to tell my story.
Yet she still included him, knowing it would break him. Instead of leaving him with love or reassurance, she made him believe he had failed her. That guilt changed his entire life and almost led him down the same dark path. Plus 100 points. With 465 sinfulness points, it's clear that Hannah wasn't just a victim. She also made choices that hurt others. She went through immense pain, but she wasn't blameless in the damage left behind. But does that mean she belongs in hell? Maybe not. Before we make that call, we need to ask one more question. Did she try to make things right? Let's take a look at her redemption. We've looked at Hannah's good deeds and her mistakes, but did Hannah ever realize the impact of her actions? Were there moments where she showed regret or wished she had done things differently before it was too late? These are the moments where Hannah tried to correct her mistakes or acknowledge the pain she caused. Apologizing to Clay. On his tape, she made it clear that Clay wasn't at fault. She admitted she pushed him away, and in her own way, she tried to make sure he didn't blame himself completely. Plus 20 points. Trying to speak up before it was too late, Hannah did reach out for help. She went to the school counselor, and while his response was terrible, it showed she still had some hope left that things could change. Plus 20 points. These are the moments where she showed deep reflection or took steps toward healing. Realizing she misjudged some people towards the end, Hannah admitted that some of the ways she reacted made things worse. She saw that not everyone who hurt her did it on purpose. She assumed Ryan was trying to humiliate her when he published her poem, but he genuinely believed he was helping. Mr. Porter failed her, but he wasn't being cruel. He was just completely unprepared to handle a crisis like hers. Even Justin, despite covering for Bryce, was trapped in his own abusive situation and didn't know how to stand up for himself. By the time she realized some people weren't as bad as she thought, the damage had already been done. 50 points. Exposing Bryce and Justin for what happened to Jessica. This was one of the most important things Hannah did. She revealed how Justin let Bryce assault Jessica while she was unconscious, something Jessica didn't even remember. Without Hannah, Jessica might have never known the truth. While it was painful, it forced Jessica to confront what happened, and it eventually led to Bryce facing consequences. Plus 50 points. These are smaller moments where she showed regret but didn't take full action to fix things. Feeling guilty for how she treated Zach, Hannah had left Zach a note during a class project, confessing that she felt invisible and hopeless. Unlike others, he kept it instead of throwing it away, but she never knew. She believed no one cared, but Zach did. She just never allowed herself to see it. By the time she found out the truth, it was too late to change anything. It's 10 points. Recognizing her parents were struggling too. She started seeing that her parents were going through their own battles, even if she didn't fully let them in. Plus 10 points. Did Hannah redeem herself? Well, she had moments of regret and even tried to fix things in some ways. She gets 160 redemption points, but are they enough to outweigh her sins? That's up for debate. Now that we've seen everything, her good deeds, her mistakes, and her attempts at redemption, it's time for the final verdict. Heaven, hell, or purgatory? Let's break it down. All right, we've gone through everything. Hannah's heroic moments, her biggest mistakes, and whether she tried to make things right. Now it's time for the ultimate judgment. Where does she belong? Scoring breakdown. Here's the breakdown of Hannah's final scores. Heroism, total 315 points. Sinfulness, total 465 points. Redemption, total 160 points. Hannah's sinfulness outweighs her heroism, meaning she doesn't qualify for heaven. However, her redemption score is significant, and she wasn't purely evil, so hell isn't the right fit either. That puts her in purgatory, caught between redemption and guilt. She wasn't beyond saving, but her actions left too much harm behind. With another chance, she might have found peace. I think that she wasn't evil enough for hell, but her wrongdoings were too heavy for heaven. Like most people, she lived in the gray area, where intentions, mistakes, and circumstances blur the line between right and wrong. No one is defined by a single choice, but by the impact they leave behind. What do you think? Do you agree with the verdict? Should Hannah be saved or damned? Let me know in the comments.